Wanted to make a short video here on how I would master a sound effect using just stock Reaper plugins and one free plugin from Melda. I don't remember where this inspiration came from, but I thought it'd be a cool little way to show, like, hey, sometimes you don't always need fancy tools like RX or anything from Synaptic, anything of the sorts. So to start, I recorded a washroom door latch using a Zoom N4. And the recording naturally is being a reverberant washroom is going to have a bit more of an ambient sound to it. And that's how it sounds. So that's cool and all, but you can't immediately use this in a project, I find. So it's going to be a process of cleaning it up. And I have everything split out here in my project for the sake of this being simplified, but this would generally be one big effects insert. So starting from the raw, I would go and first thing I would do is add an EQ. And this is just to clean up any low end rumble that I don't necessarily want to keep in my recording because the source isn't generating frequencies down that low, so I don't need them. Just going to turn up the volume here. So immediately it's already a lot cleaner, but we can take this a lot further. After this, I'll go and do some expansion using the stock Reaper expander. And what this is doing is just taking whatever ambient noise that is below my set threshold here, and it's just turning it down by a bit. I don't like to go too aggressive with this because then I find like the gating effect is very obvious and doesn't sound too great. So this is more of a light-ish expander. After that, I have MRatioMB, and this is just turning down the noise, basically. Almost like a broadband denoiser, in a way. Try to turn this off. It's subtle, but I think it definitely just brings out more of the tonal elements, which is awesome. From here, I have a transient shaper. And the thought process behind this is to use transient shaping to turn down the sustain of the sound, but bring up the attack, because I really want to bring out these little intricate clicks and all that. From here, some compression, because now we're starting to create some louder peaks and I want to get everything a bit more under control. This is really only kicking in at the really loud spots. It's maybe only 2-3 decibels of reduction at absolute most. I like to do a lot of processing in small increments because I find doing everything in small stages versus one more aggressive pass tends to sound a bit more natural. From here, I have some more transient shaping. Same idea as one before, just doing it again to further bring down the sustain and turn up the attack by a wee little bit. Now to make the sound a bit more exciting, I'm using this saturation plugin from Reaper to saturate the whole thing without it. I think it's just making it a bit more exciting to listen to in the ear. From here, from stereo width control to turn down the side information. To me, it's a little bit more useful. I mean, like a lot of times this stuff will end up being mono, but I like to keep a stereo version just in case it could be used. It's not too hard to convert something from stereo to mono or just keep a left channel, for example. After that, some more compression. Here I'm doing two compressors at once with slightly different attack and release settings. And this is just to, again, further level out the recording so everything is more or less around the same volume. Then from here, I have some two EQs. And these EQs are, first one here is enhancing the sound by a little bit. Here I'm boosting up the low one because I really want to keep some of that low woody knockiness that comes from this being a metal latch on a wood door. And then I'm turning down some of the roomy-ish sound. That's about, what is this? It's around 700 hertz or so. And then I'm boosting the high end just to make it a little bit more sparkly. Because sometimes I find a lot of with these handheld recorders, sometimes I just want to get a bit more brightness out of them because sometimes they're a little bit dull compared to other setups. So this is a great way to compensate for that. And the second EQ is kind of just taking out the qualities that I don't necessarily like in the sound. Here I'm getting rid of, I don't know, something around like 550 hertz and something at 2.5 kilohertz I didn't really like. And then boosting just above that. Or just play before and after of that. Here at this point, it's going to sound like the sound's going to be a little bit weaker because I am taking out some of the low mids. However, to compensate for that, I then go and enhance the bass afterwards. The thought process behind this is to get rid of any of the low bassy stuff that I don't like and then add something that's a bit more controlled that I do like. So here I'm using a huge booty bass enhancer. And to be honest, this is one of my first times really using this. I really want to try and see how much I could really do using the stock Reaper plugins. And it's very subtle, I find. So I'm using several instances of it. I think it sounds cool with it. Again, it's subtle, but I think it adds something. Then from here, I'm using Reaper Louderizer, which I think is kind of like an inflator. Just turns it up in a really subtle way in the mid-range. And then using Relimit to limit the peaks. I like to keep a lot of things like this with a -2 ceiling, so that way if I'm scrolling through my library, I'm not playing any sound that's going to be crazy loud and be like, ah. So from here, that's pretty much what the end sound is going to be. So to play a before and after, this is what we started with. And then after all this. After that, I will go and edit out the files, so that I'm getting rid of any of the empty spaces between all the performances that I don't necessarily want, so that I'm just keeping the bits that I want to keep and getting rid of whatever I don't want to keep. After this, I will go and compile all these onto another track or so, and I will render them as one file with 1 second gaps in between each variation. So that way, when it goes into my library, it's a little bit more consistent and easier to get alternate variations that way. And plus, if I'm using handy scripts, like say the MVK tools, it can detect pretty well if there's a decent gap between each sound. And after I do this, I will use the wonderful UCS tool, and I'll go and input my metadata here. It's a door hardware, reverberant washroom, old metal door latch, lock, unlock. And then I'll generally add description, title, microphones used, all that fun stuff. So that way in my sound library, it can be easier to find the sound whenever I need something like this. And I tend to add things like sweetener and character to sounds that I think have a bit of a charm to it. So that way, if I'm working on a design and I want to add something that has character or find a sweetener, sometimes I like to type in the word sweetener so I can find a completely random sound because the sweetener is very ambiguous. And sometimes I find little gems that just work really well. So I hope this is helpful or inspiring on how I would go about mastering a sound using stock Reaper.